Terrifying orca attack claims life of marine biologist Zoe Harper. How will this story turn out? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. Zoe Harper stood at the edge of the research vessel, her boots planted firmly on the deck as the cold, salty wind whipped through her hair. The open sea stretched endlessly before her, its dark waves glittering under the morning sun. For as long as she could remember, Zoe had been drawn to the ocean, not just for its beauty, but for the mysteries it held beneath its surface. And today, her mission was to unravel some of those mysteries. "Zoe, you're really going in today?" asked Callum, one of her colleagues, his tone tinged with concern. He adjusted his thick jacket and peered out at the waters. "The reports about that pod, they've been acting off. Unusually territorial." Zoe smiled, her calm confidence unshaken. "That's exactly why I have to go, Callum. If their behavior is shifting, it's our job to figure out why. That's what we're here for." Callum shook his head, his worry evident. "Just be careful, okay? Orcas are smart, but they're unpredictable. They're not your aquarium-trained whales." Zoe nodded, appreciating his concern. "Don't worry. I've been studying them for years. I know what to look for." The bay they were anchored in was remote, far from bustling human activity. It was known among marine biologists for its high orca population, a place where pods pass through regularly, their presence both a gift and a challenge for researchers. Zoe had spent months preparing for this trip, meticulously studying reports and planning her dives. She was particularly interested in one pod, led by a large male they had nicknamed Titan. While most of the pod exhibited typical social behaviors, there were consistent reports of one younger orca acting aggressively, isolating itself from the others, and occasionally exhibiting threatening behavior toward boats and divers. Zoe's goal was to understand what had caused this shift. Was the orca sick? Injured? Or was it something deeper, something tied to the dynamics of the pod? She donned her wetsuit in silence, the steady rhythm of the ocean filling the air. The rest of the team busied themselves with equipment, their chatter subdued. Zoe ran through her mental checklist, ensuring every piece of gear was in perfect condition. Her underwater camera, her recording device, and her safety knife were all secured. As she adjusted her mask, Callum approached again. "Last chance to change your mind," he said, trying to sound lighthearted but failing to hide his unease. Zoe laughed softly. "You know me better than that." Callum sighed. "Yeah, I do. Just remember, if anything feels wrong, don't push it. We'll be here to pull you out if you need us." Zoe patted his shoulder. "Thanks, Callum. I'll be fine." With a final deep breath, she stepped to the edge of the boat and slipped into the water. The world beneath the surface was both tranquil and alive. Rays of sunlight pierced through the waves, illuminating the underwater landscape. Schools of fish darted around her, their silvery scales catching the light. The soundscape was rich with clicks, whistles, and the occasional distant call of an orca. Zoe adjusted her camera, capturing the beauty around her as she swam deeper. It wasn't long before she spotted them, the pod of orcas she had come to study. They moved with effortless grace, their sleek bodies cutting through the water like shadows. Zoe's heart swelled with awe, even after years of studying these magnificent creatures. Each orca had its own unique markings, its own personality, its own role within the pod. She could identify Titan instantly, his massive dorsal fin slicing through the water like a blade. He swam at the center of the group, his presence commanding yet calm. Zoe kept her distance, observing the pod's interactions. She recorded their movements, their vocalizations, the way they seemed to coordinate their actions. But her focus kept drifting to one particular orca, a younger male who lingered at the edges of the group. His movements were erratic, his calls sharper and more frequent than the others. This was the orca that had been reported as aggressive, and now seeing him up close, Zoe understood why. There was an intensity in his movements, a tension that set him apart from the rest of the pod. As Zoe observed, the younger orca suddenly broke away from the group, turning sharply in her direction. Her pulse quickened as she watched him approach, his massive form growing larger with each passing second. She stayed perfectly still, her training kicking in. Orcas were curious by nature, and sudden movements could be misinterpreted as a threat. The orca circled her, his dark eye fixed on her as he let out a series of sharp clicks. Zoe held her breath, every muscle in her body tense. She could see the power in his movements, the sheer force that could end her life in an instant if he chose to. But after a few moments, the orca seemed to lose interest, turning back toward the pod and disappearing into the depths. Zoe let out a shaky exhale, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her camera. It was a close encounter, but it had given her valuable data. She swam back to the boat, her mind racing with thoughts of what she had just experienced. Back on the deck, Zoe was met with a mixture of relief and concern from her team. "That was way too close," Callum said, his voice sharp. "That orca wasn't just curious, it was testing you." Zoe nodded, her expression serious. "I know. There's something going on with him. He's not acting like the others. I need to figure out why." Callum threw up his hands. "You've already got plenty of data. You don't need to put yourself in danger again." Zoe shook her head. "This is what we do, Callum. Understanding their behavior is the first step to protecting them and us. If we can figure out what's triggering his aggression, we can prevent future incidents." Callum sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Just promise me you'll be careful." Zoe smiled faintly. "Always." That night, as the team reviewed the footage, Zoe couldn't shake the image of the younger orca from her mind. There was something about him, something beyond simple aggression. She replayed the footage over and over, analyzing every movement, every vocalization. Her curiosity burned brighter than her fear, driving her to plan another dive for the following morning. As the boat rocked gently on the waves, Zoe stared out at the dark expanse of the sea. The moonlight danced on the water's surface, its silvery glow illuminating the vast, unknowable depths. She felt a strange mix of excitement and trepidation. The ocean was beautiful, yes, but it was also merciless. And tomorrow, she would face it once again. Morning broke with a golden glow over the bay, the waves calm and deceptively serene. Zoe stood at the edge of the deck, her wetsuit already clinging to her like a second skin. The events of the previous day lingered in her mind, the younger orca's sharp movements, the unsettling intensity in his gaze. She couldn't ignore the feeling that there was more to his behavior than aggression. Was he warning her? Testing her? Or was he simply reacting to something she couldn't yet understand? The rest of the team gathered on deck, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. Callum handed Zoe her gear, his movements deliberate as though he was trying to delay her departure. "Zoe," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the gentle sound of the waves. "You're sure about this?" Zoe adjusted her mask, her expression calm but resolute. "I am. If there's something wrong with that orca, I need to know. This isn't just about research, it's about understanding how to coexist with them." Callum sighed, running a hand through his messy blonde hair. "Just don't push it, okay? If it starts to feel off, you get out of there. Promise me." Zoe gave him a reassuring smile. "I promise." With her equipment secured and her mind focused, Zoe slipped into the water once again. The cool embrace of the ocean greeted her, familiar and calming despite the risks that awaited her below. The pod was farther out today, their dark shapes barely visible against the turquoise depths. Zoe swam steadily, her movements deliberate as she approached. The underwater world was alive with sound, high-pitched clicks and whistles of the orcas mingling with the distant hum of the currents. She felt a sense of awe every time she entered this realm, where the rules of the surface world no longer applied. As she drew closer, the pod came into view. Titan, the dominant male, was at the center, his massive dorsal fin cutting through the water with ease. The other members of the pod swam around him, their movements synchronized and graceful. Zoe marveled at their beauty, her camera capturing every detail. But her focus remained on the younger orca. He was there, lingering at the edges of the group as he had before. His movements were restless, his sharp clicks cutting through the water like warnings. Zoe watched him carefully, her instincts on high alert. The orca's behavior was unlike anything she had observed in other pods. He seemed to oscillate between aggression and hesitation, as though torn between two impulses. Zoe's mind raced with possibilities. Was he challenging Titan for dominance? Was he reacting to some unseen threat? Or was it something else entirely? As Zoe continued to observe, the younger orca suddenly broke away from the pod. He swam directly toward her, his powerful body slicing through the water with alarming speed. Zoe's heart raced as she held her position, her training reminding her not to panic. Orcas were intelligent and curious, and sudden movements could escalate a situation. The orca slowed as he approached, his dark eye locking onto hers. Zoe could see the raw power in his movements, the tension in his sleek form. He let out a series of sharp clicks, the sound reverberating through the water. It was almost as if he was communicating with her, though the message was unclear. Zoe remained still, her breathing steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She raised her camera slowly, capturing the encounter as the orca circled her. His movements were close, too close, but she resisted the urge to back away. This was a rare opportunity to observe his behavior up close, and she wasn't going to squander it. The orca circled her one final time before darting back toward the pod. Zoe let out a shaky breath, her body trembling with the effort of staying calm. She turned to follow him, her camera capturing his every move. But as she watched, she noticed something unusual. The younger orca wasn't returning to the pod. Instead, he was circling Titan, his movements sharp and aggressive. The pod's harmonious rhythm was disrupted as the other orcas reacted to the tension. Titan let out a low, resonant call, a sound of warning that echoed through the water. Zoe watched in fascination and growing unease as the younger orca charged at Titan, his powerful body slamming into the older male. The impact sent a ripple through the water, and the pods scattered in confusion. Titan responded with a display of dominance, his clicks and whistles louder and more forceful than before. The confrontation was brief but intense. The younger orca eventually backed down, retreating to the outskirts of the group. Titan resumed his position at the center, his authority reestablished. But the tension lingered, and Zoe couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Back on the boat, Zoe reviewed the footage with the team. The confrontation between the younger orca and Titan had left everyone unsettled. "It's a power struggle," Zoe explained, her eyes fixed on the screen. "He's challenging Titan for dominance, but he's not strong enough to win. That's why he's been acting out." Callum frowned, his arms crossed over his chest. "And what happens if he keeps pushing? If he decides to take out that frustration on something or someone else?" Zoe hesitated, her mind racing with possibilities. "It's hard to say, but the fact that he backed down today is a good sign. It means he still respects Titan's authority, at least for now." Callum didn't look convinced. "For now. But what about tomorrow? Or the next day? You saw how close he got to you out there, Zoe. He's not just challenging Titan, he's testing everyone around him, including us." That night, Zoe lay awake in her bunk, the gentle rocking of the boat doing little to calm her nerves. Callum's words echoed in her mind, but so did her own instincts. The younger orca's behavior was troubling, yes, but it was also fascinating. Understanding him could unlock new insights into orca's social dynamics, insights that could help protect both humans and marine life. She stared out the small porthole at the dark expanse of the ocean. The water was calm, its surface shimmering under the moonlight. But beneath that calm lay an untamed world, a world where survival often meant conflict, and where the line between predator and prey was razor-thin. Zoe knew the risks of her work. She had always known, but she also knew that the ocean's mysteries were worth exploring, even if it meant venturing into the unknown. As dawn broke, Zoe prepared for another dive. This time, she planned to focus on observing the younger orca from a distance, minimizing the risk of another close encounter. The team was uneasy, their concerns evident in the way they moved around her. Callum handed her gear silently, his jaw set in a firm line. "Be careful out there," he said finally, his voice low. "I mean it." Zoe nodded, her expression calm but serious. "I will." With a final deep breath, she slipped into the water, the cool embrace of the ocean welcoming her once again. The pod was farther out today, their movements more scattered than usual. Zoe approached cautiously, her camera ready as she scanned the group. The younger orca was there, lingering at the edges as he had before. But something was different. His movements were sharper, more erratic, and his clicks were louder and more frequent. Zoe's heart pounded as she realized he was approaching her again, his powerful body cutting through the water with alarming speed. This time, there was no hesitation in his movements, no sign of curiosity. The younger orca was charging directly at her. Zoe's instincts kicked in the moment she saw the younger orca's sudden charge. Her heart raced as she held her ground, knowing that any sudden movement could escalate the situation. She gripped her underwater camera tightly, trying to stay calm as the orca closed the distance between them. His sleek body moved like a missile through the water, his powerful tail propelling him forward with terrifying speed. Zoe could see the raw intensity in his dark eyes, his sharp clicks reverberating through the water. There was no mistaking his intent. This was not a display of curiosity or dominance. This was aggression. The orca stopped abruptly just a few feet from her, the force of his movement sending a wave of water rippling around her. He circled her once, his massive body blocking her view of the pod in the distance. Zoe's breathing quickened as she turned slowly to keep him in her sights. She could feel the tension in the water, the electric charge of a predator sizing up its target. Zoe reached for the communicator strapped to her wrist, her voice steady despite the fear creeping into her chest. "Callum, he's here. The younger one. He's circling me." Static crackled in her ear before Callum's voice came through, sharp and urgent. "Get out of there, Zoe." "No. I'm trying," she whispered, her eyes locked on the orca as he circled her again. "But he's not letting me move." The orca stopped suddenly, his head tilting as if he were studying her. Then, with a sharp click, he lunged forward, his massive jaws snapping inches from her. Zoe flinched, her body instinctively jerking back. The movement seemed to trigger something in the orca, and he lunged again, this time grazing her shoulder with his snout. "Zoe." Callum's voice was frantic now. "We're coming to get you. Hold on." The orca's movements grew more erratic, his clicks and whistles sharper and more frequent. Zoe knew she couldn't stay in his path for long. She turned slowly, her movements deliberate as she began to swim backward, keeping her eyes on him. Her mind raced as she tried to think of a way to de-escalate the situation. The orca lunged again, his body brushing against her with enough force to knock her off balance. Zoe tumbled through the water, her camera slipping from her grasp and sinking into the depths. She scrambled to regain her composure, her arms and legs moving frantically as she tried to stabilize herself. Before she could react, the orca lunged again, this time ramming her side with his snout. The impact knocked the wind out of her, and she gasped, bubbles escaping from her mouth as she clutched her ribs. Pain shot through her body, but she forced herself to stay focused. Panic would only make things worse. The surface of the water seemed impossibly far away, the sunlight filtering through the waves like distant stars. Zoe kicked her legs, propelling herself upward as fast as she could. She could feel the orca behind her, his presence a shadow of danger that loomed over her every movement. "Zoe, we're lowering the cage." Callum's voice crackled in her ear, barely audible over the sound of her own labored breathing. "Just get to the surface. We've got you." Zoe's lungs burned as she swam, her strokes growing weaker with each passing second. The pain in her side was relentless, but she pushed through it, her survival instincts taking over. She could see the outline of the boat above her, the metal cage glinting as it was lowered into the water. Just as she reached for the bars of the cage, the orca struck again, his massive body slamming into her legs. The force sent her spinning, her hands slipping from the cage as she tumbled through the water. Zoe let out a muffled scream, the sound swallowed by the ocean around her. The team above scrambled to pull the cage back up, their shouts echoing across the water. Callum leaned over the edge, his eyes scanning the waves desperately. "Zoe," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Where are you?" Zoe managed to right herself, her vision blurring as she fought to stay conscious. The orca circled her again, his movements slower now, almost calculating. She could see the scars along his dorsal fin, the jagged edges that told a story of past battles. This wasn't just aggression, it was personal. The orca lunged one final time, his jaws snapping around her arm. Zoe's scream was a burst of bubbles as the pain seared through her body. She thrashed against him, her free hand clawing at his snout as she fought to break free. The orca shook her like a rag doll, his strength overwhelming. Above the surface, the team watched in horror as the water turned red. Callum's knuckles were white as he gripped the edge of the boat, his eyes wide with terror. "We have to go in after her," he shouted, his voice breaking. "We can't," another team member yelled, pulling him back. "It's too dangerous. We'll lose more people." Callum shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "We can't just leave her. She's still down there." The boat rocked violently as the orca breached the surface, Zoe's limp body clamped in his jaws. For a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. The orca's dark eye locked onto Callum's, and then he disappeared beneath the waves, taking Zoe with him. The minutes that followed were a blur of panic and devastation. The team deployed every piece of equipment they had, scanning the water for any sign of Zoe. But as the sun dipped lower in the sky, their hope began to fade. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the Orca surfaced again. This time, he was alone. The team could only watch in stunned silence as he swam away, his massive form disappearing into the distance. Callum collapsed onto the deck, his hands trembling as he buried his face in them. "She's gone," he whispered, the words barely audible. "She's really gone." The recovery mission that followed was somber and gut-wrenching. Zoe's body was found washed up on a nearby shore the next day, her wetsuit torn and her face pale and still. The team gathered around her, their grief palpable as they silently mourned the loss of their friend and colleague. For Callum, the guilt was unbearable. He replayed the events in his mind over and over, questioning every decision he had made. Could he have done more? Could he have saved her? Zoe Harper had dedicated her life to understanding the creatures of the ocean, and in the end, it was the ocean that had claimed her. Her death sent shockwaves through the scientific community, sparking debates about the ethics of studying wild animals and the risks involved in such work. The orca that had taken Zoe's life was never seen again, his fate a mystery that only deepened the tragedy. But for those who had known Zoe, her legacy lived on. Her research inspired new safety protocols for marine biologists, and her story became a powerful reminder of the delicate balance between humans and nature. As the team packed up their equipment and prepared to leave the bay, Callum stood at the edge of the boat, staring out at the horizon. The water was calm once again, its surface shimmering under the morning sun. But beneath that calm lay a world of untamed beauty and danger, a world that Zoe had loved with all her heart. With a heavy sigh, Callum turned away, his mind filled with memories of Zoe's laughter, her determination, and her unwavering passion. She had faced the ocean with courage and curiosity, and though her life had been cut short, her impact would be felt for years to come. The days following Zoe's death were a haze of grief and unanswered questions for her team. Back at the research facility on shore, the weight of her absence was impossible to ignore. Her desk, once cluttered with notebooks and sketches of orcas, now sat untouched. The equipment she meticulously maintained had been packed away, and the quiet that filled the space felt suffocating. Callum found himself sitting in the lab late at night, staring at the footage Zoe had recorded during her final dives. The glowing screen cast an eerie light over his face as he rewound and replayed the moments leading up to her last encounter. Every detail, the younger orca's sharp movements, the tension in Zoe's voice, the escalating aggression, played over and over in his mind. He couldn't stop asking himself what they had missed, what they could have done differently. The scientific community was quick to respond to the tragedy. Zoe's death made headlines, sparking debates among marine biologists and conservationists. Some argued that the risks of studying wild orcas had always been clear, and that Zoe had knowingly accepted those risks. Others questioned whether more could have been done to protect her, both in terms of safety protocols and understanding the behavioral shifts in orcapods. One of the central questions was why the younger orca had attacked. Was it simply an act of territorial aggression, or was there something deeper at play? The footage Zoe had captured offered some clues, but it wasn't enough to provide a definitive answer. Theories ranged from environmental stressors to disruptions in the pod's social structure. Whatever the cause, it was clear that the attack had been calculated and deliberate, a stark reminder of the ocean's unpredictable nature. For Callum, the loss was deeply personal. Zoe had been more than just a colleague. She had been a friend, a confidant, and a source of inspiration. Her passion for understanding marine life had been infectious, and her determination had driven the team to push boundaries and take risks. Now, without her, Callum felt lost. One evening, as he sat on the dock overlooking the bay, a light breeze carrying the salty scent of the sea, Callum pulled out Zoe's journal. She had always been meticulous about documenting her observations, filling page after page with sketches, notes, and questions. As he flipped through the pages, her voice seemed to echo in his mind, a steady reminder of her dedication. In one entry, written just days before her final dive, Zoe had noted something that caught Callum's attention. The younger orca's behavior is more than just aggression. It feels purposeful. He's trying to communicate something, but I can't figure out what. I need more time. The words lingered in Callum's mind, fueling a sense of urgency that he couldn't ignore. Zoe had believed that there was more to the younger orca's actions, and Callum felt compelled to honor her work by finding answers. But returning to the bay, to the very waters where they had lost her, was a daunting prospect. The team was divided on whether to continue the research. Some felt that the risks were too great, that they couldn't afford to lose anyone else. Others argued that stopping now would mean letting Zoe's death be in vain. Callum, torn between grief and determination, ultimately made the decision to proceed. "We owe it to her," he told the team during a tense meeting. "Zoe dedicated her life to understanding these creatures. If we stop now, everything she worked for will be unfinished." The team agreed, albeit reluctantly. They would return to the bay, armed with stricter safety protocols and a renewed sense of caution. But beneath their resolve lay a current of fear, an unspoken acknowledgement of the dangers that awaited them. When the team arrived back at the bay, the atmosphere was different. The waters, once teeming with life, now felt eerily quiet. The pod of Orcas was nowhere to be seen, and the absence of their calls left an unsettling void. Callum couldn't shake the feeling that the younger orca's actions had disrupted the balance of the pod, driving them away from their usual territory. The team set up their equipment, scanning the waters for any sign of activity. Hours passed with no movement, and tension began to mount. Just as they were about to call it a day, a sharp, high-pitched whistle pierced the air. Callum froze, his heart pounding. The sound was unmistakable. It was the call of an orca. The team rushed to the deck, their eyes scanning the horizon. In the distance, a sleek black dorsal fin broke the surface, followed by another. It was the pod, returning after days of absence. The sight brought a mix of relief and apprehension. While it was a chance to continue their research, it also meant the possibility of encountering the younger orca again. As the pod approached, the team began recording data, their movements careful and deliberate. Titan was at the forefront, his massive presence as commanding as ever. The other orcas swam in formation around him, their movements synchronized and graceful. But the younger orca was nowhere to be seen. The absence of the younger orca puzzled Callum. Had he left the pod entirely? Was he injured or worse? Theories swirled in his mind as he observed the pod's behavior. Without the younger orca's disruptive presence, the group seemed more cohesive, their interactions fluid and harmonious. For days, the team observed the pod, gathering valuable data but finding no trace of the younger orca. Callum couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Zoe's notes had suggested that the younger orca's behavior was key to understanding the dynamics of the pod. Without him, the puzzle felt incomplete. Then, on the seventh day, the younger orca returned. The team was documenting the pod's feeding patterns when sudden commotion erupted in the water. The younger orca appeared out of nowhere, his movements erratic and aggressive. He charged through the group, disrupting their formation and causing a ripple of chaos. Callum's heart raced as he watched the scene unfold. The younger orca's presence was like a storm, unsettling everything in its path. Titan responded with a low, resonant call, attempting to reassert his dominance. But the younger orca didn't back down. His clicks were sharp and insistent, his body language defiant. The confrontation escalated quickly. The younger orca lunged at Titan, their massive bodies colliding with a force that sent waves crashing against the boat. The rest of the pod scattered, their movements frantic as they tried to avoid the clash. Callum grabbed the communicator, his voice urgent. "We're pulling back. This is too dangerous." The team began retreating, the boat moving away from the chaos. But Callum couldn't tear his eyes away from the scene. The younger orca was relentless, his attacks growing more desperate with each passing moment. Titan, though larger and more experienced, seemed to struggle under the onslaught. Finally, with one powerful strike, Titan drove the younger orca away. The defeated male let out a high-pitched cry, a sound that echoed across the bay before he disappeared beneath the waves. The pod slowly regrouped, their movements cautious and subdued. The energy in the water had shifted, the balance restored but fragile. Callum exhaled deeply, his hands trembling as he set down the communicator. That night, as the boat rocked gently on the waves, Callum sat alone on the deck. The events of the day played over and over in his mind, each detail etched into his memory. He thought of Zoe, of her unwavering curiosity and determination. She had believed there was something deeper to the younger orca's behavior, and now Callum understood what she had meant. The younger orca wasn't just aggressive, he was struggling to find his place in the world. His actions were driven by instinct, by a need for connection and belonging that he couldn't express in any other way. It was a reminder of the complexity of these creatures, their intelligence and emotions a mirror of humanity's own struggles. As the first stars appeared in the sky, Callum made a silent promise to Zoe. He would continue her work, not just for her, but for the orcas she had devoted her life to understanding. Their story was far from over, and he would ensure that her legacy endured. The younger orca's cry echoed in Callum's mind as he sat at the edge of his bunk, staring at the still waters beyond the porthole. The confrontation he had witnessed that day between the younger male and Titan had been unlike anything he had ever seen in his years as a marine biologist. The aggression, the desperation, it all painted a vivid picture of a creature at odds with his own instincts and his pod. Callum flipped through Zoe's journal again, lingering on the sketches she had made of the younger orca. Each sketch captured a different aspect of his demeanor, his sharp eyes, his sleek body, and most strikingly, the subtle differences in his dorsal fin compared to the rest of the pod. Zoe had noted these features meticulously, always seeking meaning in every observation. "It's not just physical," Callum murmured to himself. "He's different." The more Callum thought about it, the more he felt the need to understand. Zoe's legacy demanded it. There was something about this orca, something that felt more complex than dominance or territoriality. The questions swirled in his mind, urging him to dive deeper into the mystery. The next morning, the team gathered for a meeting on the deck. The tension among them was palpable. The confrontation between the younger orca and Titan had shaken everyone, and the risks of continuing their research weighed heavily on their minds. "We can't keep doing this," one of the researchers said, her voice tinged with frustration. "That orca is too unpredictable. It's only a matter of time before something else happens." Callum leaned forward, his gaze steady. "I understand the risks, but I also know that Zoe wouldn't have wanted us to stop. She believed there was more to his behavior, and I think she was right. But at what cost?" Another team member interjected. "We've already lost her. Are we really willing to take that chance again?" Callum took a deep breath, his resolve unwavering. "I'm not asking anyone to put themselves in danger. If you want to stay on the boat, I won't hold it against you. But I need to keep going. For Zoe. For the orcas." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over the team. After a moment, Callum's closest colleague, a marine biologist named Elena, spoke up. "I'm with you," she said firmly. Zoe believed in this work, and so do I. One by one, the others nodded in agreement. The decision was made. They would press on with greater caution, but with the same determination that had brought them here in the first place. That afternoon, the team deployed their equipment, setting up hydrophones to monitor the pod's vocalizations from a safe distance. The water was calm, the surface shimmering under the midday sun. For hours, they listened to the clicks and whistles of the orcas, each sound providing valuable data about their communication and behavior. Callum was reviewing the recordings when he noticed something unusual. The younger orca's vocalization stood out from the rest, sharper, more erratic, and interspersed with low-frequency pulses that were difficult to interpret. He leaned closer to the monitor, his brow furrowing as he tried to make sense of the patterns. "Elena," he called, motioning for her to join him. "Listen to this. It's him. He's not just making noise, he's trying to say something." Elena slipped on the headphones, her expression growing serious as she listened. "You're right," she said after a moment. "This isn't random. He's repeating certain sequences, almost like a code." The two of them worked late into the night, analyzing the recordings and cross-referencing them with Zoe's notes. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge, a series of sounds that seemed to correspond to specific behaviors. It was a breakthrough, one that hinted at a deeper level of intelligence and communication within the pod. The next day, the team prepared for another close observation of the pod. Callum felt a mix of anticipation and apprehension as they approached the area where the orcas had been spotted. The younger male's presence loomed large in his mind, but he also felt a growing sense of curiosity. What was the orca trying to communicate? And why had his behavior become so erratic? As the team deployed the small research boat, Callum kept his eyes fixed on the water. The pod was visible in the distance, their sleek bodies moving in unison. Titan led the group, his massive dorsal fin cutting through the waves like a blade. The younger orca was there too, lingering at the edges as he always did. Callum adjusted the hydrophone, listening carefully as the orca's vocalizations filled the air. The younger male's sharp clicks were unmistakable, a constant undercurrent that added tension to the group's harmony. Callum's fingers tightened on the controls as he focused on the sound, trying to decipher its meaning. Suddenly, the younger orca broke away from the pod, swimming directly toward the research boat. Callum's heart raced as he watched the sleek black and white shape grow larger, the water parting around him with every powerful stroke. The team froze, their movements cautious as they prepared for whatever was about to happen. The orca stopped just shore of the boat, his massive body casting a shadow over the deck. He let out a series of sharp clicks, the sound so loud that it vibrated through the hull. Callum leaned over the edge, his eyes locking onto the orca's dark, intelligent gaze. "What is he doing?" Elena whispered, her voice barely audible. "I think he's trying to tell us something," Callum replied, his voice filled with awe. "But what?" The orca let out another series of clicks, followed by a low-frequency pulse that made the water ripple. Callum grabbed the hydrophone, recording every sound as he tried to make sense of the patterns. The orca's movements were deliberate, almost as if he was waiting for a response. Then, without warning, the orca turned sharply and dove beneath the surface. The team watched in stunned silence as his sleek form disappeared into the depths. Callum felt a pang of frustration, but also a spark of hope. The encounter had been brief, but it had confirmed what he already suspected. This orca was different, and he was reaching out in a way that defied explanation. As the team packed up their equipment and headed back to the main vessel, Callum couldn't stop thinking about the orca's actions. The clicks, the pulses, the way he had approached the boat, it all felt purposeful, as though the orca was trying to bridge the gap between their worlds. That night, as Callum reviewed the footage and recordings, he felt a renewed sense of determination. The younger orca's behavior was a puzzle, one that demanded patience and understanding to solve. And though the risks were great, Callum knew that the answers lay beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. The next morning, the team prepared for what would likely be their final encounter with the pod. The research mission was nearing its end, and despite the breakthroughs they had achieved, the risks were beginning to outweigh the rewards. Callum had made the decision to focus on observing the younger orca one last time, hoping to capture more data that might shed light on his behavior. The waters were calm as they approached the pod's location. The orcas moved gracefully through the waves, their clicks and whistles filling the air with a haunting melody. Titan led the group as usual, his massive dorsal fin a beacon of authority. But as the team scanned the pod, they quickly realized that the younger orca was missing. Callum felt a pang of disappointment. After everything they had observed, the younger male's absence was a blow to their research. But just as he was about to signal the team to pack up, a loud splash broke the surface of the water. The younger orca appeared, his sleek body cutting through the waves with purpose. He swam toward the pod, his movements sharp and aggressive. The other orcas scattered, their clicks growing frantic as they tried to avoid him. Titan let out a low, resonant call, his presence commanding as he moved to confront the younger male. The confrontation was immediate and intense. The two orcas clashed in a storm of powerful movements, their bodies colliding with enough force to send waves crashing against the boat. The team watched in stunned silence as the younger orca lunged at Titan, his clicks sharp and insistent. Callum grabbed the hydrophone, recording every sound as the battle unfolded. The vocalizations were unlike anything he had ever heard, a mix of aggression, frustration, and something else he couldn't quite identify. It was as though the younger orca was pleading, his sharp clicks carrying an urgency that tugged at Callum's instincts. The fight continued for what felt like an eternity. Titan's dominance was undeniable, but the younger orca's determination was relentless. The team watched in awe and trepidation as the younger male lunged again and again, each strike more desperate than the last. Finally, with one powerful blow, Titan forced the younger orca to retreat. The defeated male let out a high-pitched cry, a sound that echoed across the bay before he disappeared beneath the surface. The pod slowly regrouped, their movements cautious and subdued. Callum felt a mix of relief and sadness as he watched the younger orca swim away. His aggression had been overwhelming, but beneath it, Callum sensed something deeper, a struggle for identity, for belonging, for understanding. As the team returned to the main vessel, Callum reviewed the recordings once again. The vocalizations of the younger orca were etched into his mind, their sharp intensity a constant reminder of the challenges they had faced. He couldn't shake the feeling that the younger male had been trying to communicate something, but the message remained elusive. Back on the deck, Callum gathered the team for one final discussion. "This has been one of the most challenging missions we've ever undertaken," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. We've faced dangers we couldn't have anticipated, and we've lost someone who meant everything to us. But through it all, we've gained a deeper understanding of these incredible creatures. He paused, glancing at the horizon where the pod had disappeared. The younger Orca. I don't think he was just acting out of aggression. I think he was searching for something we may never fully understand. But what we've learned here will help us move forward to continue Zoe's work and honor her legacy. The team nodded, their expressions a mix of grief and determination. They had come to the bay as researchers, but they were leaving as something more, a group united by their shared experiences, their losses, and their unwavering commitment to the ocean and its inhabitants. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Callum stood alone on the deck. The waters were calm, the golden light reflecting off the waves like liquid fire. He held Zoe's journal in his hands, its pages filled with her thoughts, her questions, her dreams. As he flipped through the journal one last time, a single entry caught his eye. It was a note she had written just days before her final dive. The ocean is a mirror, reflecting our deepest fears and our greatest hopes. To understand it is to understand ourselves. Callum closed the journal, his heart heavy but full of resolve. Zoe had given everything to understand the ocean, to bridge the gap between humans and the creatures that called it home. And though her life had been cut short, her spirit lived on in every note, every recording, every memory. As the stars appeared in the sky, Callum turned his gaze to the horizon. The pod was gone, their journey continuing in the endless expanse of the ocean. But their story, Zoe's story, would never be forgotten. With a deep breath, Callum made a silent promise to the ocean, to Zoe, and to himself. The work was far from over, but he would carry it forward with the same passion and determination that had defined her life. And as the first rays of moonlight danced on the waves, the bay seemed to whisper its own promise in return, a promise of beauty, of mystery, and of the unbreakable bond between humans and the world beneath the surface.